controversy that's going on right now surrounding the Joe Rogan podcast and celebrities surrounding around the world. There are now what obviously we saw last week was a showdown between Spotify and Neil Young. Neil Young throwing down the gauntlet, saying, "If you don't remove Joe Rogan, remove me." He says it's Joe Rogan or me. And Spotify immediately responded by saying, "We choose Joe Rogan." Now, Joe Rogan has about 11.5 million daily listeners to every single one of his shows on Spotify. I'm not sure how many streams Neil Young has, but that was a very clear that was a very clear choice for Spotify. People are paying for the service at Spotify largely because, or going over to Spotify largely because of Joe Rogan being there. I know personally that I listen to Spotify only for a couple of the different podcasts that they have on there. Joe Rogan being one of them, Jordan Peterson being another one. And I find it's you have these celebrities that are now stepping in and saying, well, it's either us or Joe Rogan. Joni Mitchell now stepping in saying that she wants her music removed from Spotify if they're not going to do something about Joe Rogan. You have Prince Harry and Meghan Markle calling Joe Rogan a menace. Now, the kind of show that I aspire to do, the kind of environment that I aspire to build is very heavily influenced by something that Joe Rogan does. You know, I travel the world. I spend a lot of time with other people, and I like just having conversations, just finding out their points of view. I do it a lot on Facebook and Instagram. I do a tremendous amount of it in person. And the goal for me was to bring that here, to have those different types of conversation on camera, different points of view, discussing all different types of topics on camera. And maybe you find some of it interesting, maybe you don't. If you like it, you watch it. If you don't like it, you don't watch it. You move on down the road. No big deal. But what he does on that show is simply have a conversation. He's a very inquisitive individual who likes to hear people's answers to certain topics. He doesn't steer them anywhere. He just has these conversations. And what you see on his show is he actually had a response to all these people that are coming out against him. He had a response. He posted on Instagram yesterday, and he talked about the fact that he's had 2 doctors on his show that are pioneers in their field. One is the inventor of the mRNA technology. The other is a cardiologist, and he is the most published doctor in his field. Something like 600 papers. He's the most published author in his field. By any stretch of the imagination, these are 2 experts that people could rely on for at least some general information. But those 2 shows are bringing a tremendous amount of attention and backlash from quote-unquote celebrities. So, but then he goes on to talk about that he's had about 7 other doctors that are basically they spout the party line. They're saying exactly what is on the agenda for the government, and that makes all these other celebrities feel nice, warm, and cozy. But they're not paying attention to those. They're saying that what he is doing is dangerous spread of misinformation. When he's not doing that at all, he is having people on that have a counter opinion to what may be occurring in society right now. And the problem that I see is that we somehow, and I say we as a society, not me personally, but as a society, seem to think that we got where we are in society by having a closed conversation. We seem to think that we accomplished the things that we've accomplished in this world by not having discussions. There are people that when you have a conversation, that are not going to hold the same exact opinion. And that is what expands the conversation. It makes you question, it makes you ask broader questions to get to the ultimate answer. Not everybody's going to think the same, and there's not one way to approach every single problem. What he's doing is opening the conversation so that other points of view can be heard, simply so that there might be another way of thinking of something. We may all end up in the same place, but how we get there may be less devastating to our economy, maybe less devastating to how our kids grow up. It may be less devastating to our culture and society as a whole. That if ultimately we get to the same spot, but it does less damage because we approached it in a much more thoughtful, better way, rather than this totalitarian dictatorship that we seem to be living under right now, where it says you have to think this way, that you have to believe this way, and there's no other way around it. Well, a year ago, if you talked about the virus potentially coming from a laboratory, leaking from a laboratory in Wuhan, you were being banned from every social media platform out there. But now, that is the most commonly accepted narrative, that this is in fact what did happen, that this is what occurred, that the virus escaped from a laboratory in Wuhan. That is widely published, that is widely accepted now, that is what occurred. A year ago, had you talked about cloth masks not being not having the effectiveness that everybody was touting, then you were being banned from social media. But now it's part of the CDC, it's part of the WHO. They talk about it on CNN, that cloth masks don't have the effectiveness that they were reporting in the very beginning. But yet people were being banned for what was claimed to be misinformation a year ago. But if you don't have a conversation about these things, about the efficacy of some of these things, then you end up only going down one road without any expansion of knowledge whatsoever, and your understanding doesn't change. So everybody coming down on him because he's having guests on his show that are allowed to speak about what they know about, what they are experts in the field. The guy who invented mRNA technology is the predominant expert in that field. He invented the technology. He should be able to tell you whether or not the way it's being used is proper. He invented it. He would know this information. What I do like out of all of this, I used to, before starting to do this, I used to listen to Howard Stern every day. I listened to him religiously. Now, I loved Howard Stern because of the comedy. It was great. Artie Lang was on there. It was so much fun to listen to the guests. Howard had a way of speaking to guests to get them to talk, and they would just have these long format conversations on Sirius XM, and it was fantastic. The comedy was amazing. The conversations were amazing. And his show was put out there as a news broadcast. He was able to do all kinds of things because it was a news broadcast. Well, I stopped listening to Howard Stern because he stopped trying to be funny and only fixated on one way of thinking. And he literally would berate and beat down anybody else that did not think exactly that same way, specifically around Trump being president. Now, he was friends with Trump, and I'm not sure if he's friends with Trump now, but he would just bash all over Trump. Didn't matter what he did. It was only based on the fact that he thought Trump didn't like his job. He said there's no way that somebody that was a billionaire, who was a playboy, who was fucking models and doing all this other stuff, could possibly enjoy doing his job. And so he would regularly just bash on him for every fucking thing under the sun. And the show lost a lot of its comedy. And then, of course, when the pandemic hit, he was having to do everything via Skype and Zoom. And I really lost interest in his show. Like just the other day, there was sound clips of he was talking about the tennis star that refused to get vaccinated, and they weren't going to allow into Australia for the Australian Open. And he was calling the guy names and, calling him a fucking idiot and a bunch of other stuff because he was making a personal choice for himself. That kind of thinking is exactly what gets us in a totalitarian dictatorship mindset, where if you don't think like me, then you are bad. Well, I don't believe that if you don't think like me, that you're a bad person. We just think differently, and we can still have a conversation, and we can walk away from the conversation still not agreeing on anything whatsoever, but at least we had a civil conversation where I'm not going to call you names and I'm not going to beat you down because of your way of thinking. You may enlighten me to something that I didn't know, maybe didn't understand, but you still didn't fully sway me. And the opposite can happen the other way. I may not fully sway you, but at least I'm going to be open-minded enough to have this conversation. And that's what Joe Rogan is doing. He's having the conversations with people. He's trying to get to the truth. And you have everybody turning on him because he's allowing people to openly discuss their opinions. That's a problem. That's a problem if we cannot express free thought in society. That is the downgrade. That's where China is. That's where Russia is, when you can't express free thought. We don't want to be that way. We need to be better than that. We need to be better than China. We need to not live under a dictatorship where everybody tells us to think the same exact way. What I will acknowledge is that I'm not a big fan of The View, because the women on there, they're just nasty and vile, and they're just anti everything that I believe I stand for. But what I will acknowledge is that both Joy Behar and Howard Stern have come out in defense of what Joe Rogan is doing, because he's doing exactly what they do. And if they want to cancel him for having open, free conversations, then what they are doing wouldn't exist either. Howard Stern is on a paid subscription platform, SiriusXM. Joe Rogan is on a paid subscription platform. Now, you can listen to the Joe Rogan show for free on Spotify, but you have to download the app. It's not like it's over the airwaves. It's not like it's put out on YouTube. He puts out clips on there now, but it's something that is a paid, basically a paid subscription service. And if they were in favor of canceling what he's doing, then what they do wouldn't exist either. So they're very smart for stepping in and saying they may not agree with what he's saying, but they're going to defend his ability to do it. Now, I have no problem with it. I think that putting disclaimers on everything, putting some type of warning on everything out there, I'm not a big fan of that. But I do like that Spotify and even Joe Rogan has stepped in to say, I'm okay with putting a disclaimer on my shows. I don't mind that whatsoever. That's not a problem. I think that if that's the little thing that has to get done just so that he can continue on having the free flow of conversation that he has, and his shows are fantastic. They're great. Some of the even the ones where it's just his friends and the other comedians coming on there, they're great conversations, and you learn. It's a lot of it can be entertainment, but if you learn one thing from every show, it's fantastic. Like, I was listening to a show the other day where he was talking with the UFC women's world champion. And they happened to talk, they were talking about different supplements that she actually, I forget her name, but she takes this particular supplement that basically creates a cushion for your brain. It's for people like boxers and fighters and even football players. They take this and it helps your brain essentially take impacts, and you can recover from, say, a concussion or getting knocked out much faster. So, I learned something like that there's a supplement out there that will work for those things. I mean, I don't need it. Some people might think I have brain damage, but I haven't had concussions like that. So, But you learn those little things from the show, and that's great. It doesn't have to be 2 hours of a lesson, but you pick up little things here and there. Like the other day, he has on a guy that is a security expert, and he talks about what your phone is actually listening to. I learned that if you have an Android phone, that your phone is uploading to the cloud every it's something like 40 or 50 times every hour, and it's updating and uploading to the cloud your location, your activity, what you're doing. Even your Android phone, even if you're not connected to like a cell service or Wi-Fi, it's still logging and tracking all of this data. And then the moment you connect to the internet, it uploads all of that information to the internet. So your Android phone is constantly tracking you. He said at the tune of about 14 megabytes an hour, which is insane. I didn't know that, but I learned that by listening to that show. The guy's not a doctor. They're not talking about COVID. They're not talking about vaccines or masks or anything. They're talking about security. That's something I learned on that show. That's the free flow of information, and that show doesn't exist where he is today. He doesn't get those kinds of people that can educate at this type of level unless he has those hard conversations as well. Howard Stern did not get to where he is in society, being worth near $1 billion, by having easy conversations on the air. He got fined, and he was being run out of radio because he was having these conversations, real conversations with people, in just in a different light. Howard Stern's conversations typically would go towards the more carnal base of human life. People talking about sex and what they do in the confines of their own home. Well, those are conversations that we all have, that people want to hear about. Especially if it's a celebrity. You may want to hear about some celebrity's sexual habits or something like that. You may be interested in that. I found a lot of that stuff enlightening and funny. It actually endeared me to some celebrities that I kind of thought were just kind of fucking ridiculous, to actually hear them have a human conversation the same way that I would with my friends and the other people that I associate with. That was very enlightening to me. And those kinds of conversations don't get to happen on regular broadcast. They happen on paid services like SiriusXM, like Spotify. So kudos to Joe Rogan, kudos to Spotify for standing up against it. Fuck all those other people. Hey, guys, you might have had some sway back in the 60s and 70s. You might have had been powerful, whatever. But when you got a guy who's got 11.5 million, almost 12 million listeners per show now, you're going to have to bring a lot more than saying take my music off, because Spotify they're going to replace you without a problem. Look, what I do very closely mirrors something like Joe Rogan or and somebody like Tim Pool. There is somebody like me or like Joe Rogan or somebody else being created every single day. So they're not really new ideas. It's just changing the nuances about how we go about doing it. It's just like musicians. Musicians are creating music. So from that basic standpoint, somebody new is coming out every single day, creating music every single day. They just go about doing it differently. They write different songs. They add different music and tracks and drums. So Spotify is just going to say, not a problem. There's new music coming out all the time. We'll take yours off, put somebody else on. We'll make room for somebody else. Not a big deal. So kudos to those guys for standing up and not letting the woke crowd dictate to them what they can and cannot say, because it's just become excessive. Which leads me directly into the next point, is to say that I was listening to Adam Carolla today. Adam Carolla brings to that point. Adam Carolla used to have the largest podcast in the world. Prior to Joe Rogan, it was Adam Carolla. It was The Man Show. Adam Carolla's podcast was the largest podcast in the world. Now, he still has a huge fan base, several million subscribers to his show that listen, but Joe Rogan has eclipsed him. So that change occurs. It happens all of the time. You have conservative talk radios like Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck and Sean Hannity. So there's always going to be a new person coming up, and eventually somebody else will take over as the new king, if you will, or queen of entertainment. So Adam Carolla was doing an interview, and he said what he has noticed within the celebrity community, especially within the comedy community, that there is starting to become a very large backlash against the narrative, because as he says, the left has overplayed their hand. They have gone too far. Now, I was having this conversation earlier. For example, George Floyd. When his death occurred, I posted on my Facebook that it was a tragedy. It should have never happened. I don't think that the sins of his past warranted him dying in that type of scenario. I don't believe that because what he has done in his past or where he's been in his past justifies him dying in that manner. Does it wipe it away though because he did die that way? I don't think so. And what has occurred was that you took a tragedy of someone's death, and all of a sudden now we're going to glorify his death. Even though that the left was trying to say his death was a complete tragedy and it should have never happened, now they're glorifying his death, trying to use that as an avenue to push their agenda. And it is now backfiring. It's now starting to turn people against them, because it ramped up the BLM movement. It ramped up the riots that surprisingly, COVID and everything was able to be completely put to the side when the narrative allowed for a new agenda for everybody. Oh, well, we got to push this now, so we can put all these other rules to the side so that we can allow this to happen. So they overplayed their hand. They've gone too far. They've allowed things to spiral out of control, and now they are losing the people that would otherwise support them. Again, someone like Joe Rogan openly discusses the fact that he is a liberal individual. He's never voted for a conservative politician. He's never voted for a conservative policy. He always votes liberal policies. Funding for the homeless, funding for this organization, that organization, higher taxes. He's always voted liberal. But you're turning someone like him away from y'all's point of view because you're going way too fucking far. You're pushing it over the edge, and you're losing your base. Someone like Bill Maher. Bill Maher is very liberal. Now, Bill Maher is a comedian, and he does a great show. And he's been he was able to transition from being a stand-up. He had a great show on originally it was on HBO. He's still on HBO, but now it's transitioned into something else. But he's very liberal, and he was very against Trump, and he was very against most of the conservatives. But you're even losing him now because he's seeing how fucking far you guys are pushing shit, and it's overboard. So, Adam Carolla today, he actually read his tweet, and I'm gonna read it right here. He says, I've learned nothing about how viruses worked in the last 2 years, but everything about how government works. That's a tweet he put out last year. Now, we as individuals are being forced to live under a certain environment, but we're not being educated as to why. We're only being told that we have to do this. We're not actually being educated about why these things are occurring. We are just being told, trust us. Do what we say and trust us. Well, look what happened in the very beginning of everything. It was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. We're 2 years later now. So Why are we not being educated? Why is the government spending so much time in trying to force us into doing something instead of helping us understand why we should? There's no education program for why these things should occur. Even worse, they have spent zero time, zero effort on educating people on how to get healthier overall. The government is not the place to dictate to you as an individual what you should do. The government is a resource that we can rely on for information, and they're not providing that information. The government is supposed to be a place that comes out and they put packages together so that way we can choose, and they're not doing that. They're simply saying you must do this. And that's wrong. That puts Americans at odds with each other. That puts us at odds with our government. I don't want to be at odds with my government. I want to love my government. I want to be proud of the things my government is doing. And right now, I'm not proud of the things my government is doing. I wasn't proud of what my government was doing the last year under Trump. I didn't like what was occurring. Thank God we live in a republic, in a federal republic where the states ultimately have control over what happens within their own states. We are sovereign within our own states, and the governors get to make these determinations, not the president. Now the president can step in. The president has the power to take us to war. The president has power to introduce budgets for for the federal government and sign off and ratify laws. The president has that ability. The president doesn't have the ability to come into Texas and shut down businesses in Texas. Only the governor of Texas can do that. Only the governor of Florida, California, New York. But what has happened is that for some reason you have the Democrats. They believe that the country is represented by California and New York, as if the rest of the fucking country doesn't exist, as if the other 48 states don't exist. Just everything is California and New York. That's it. And they're losing everybody in the middle. Because the rest of us want to just live our lives. We want to take care of our families. We want to earn a living. We want to pay our bills, and we want to live free. And the left has spiraled out of control, and they keep doubling down. They double down and double down and double down. They get a bunch of pushback on this one thing over here, but they want it so badly that they just shift over here and they try to come even harder. And it's just going to cause people to fight back even more, like what's happening in Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently, just this past weekend, had to quarantine because he came down with COVID. Now, if he's doing everything that he's supposed to be doing, how'd he get COVID? I mean, he's got everybody locked down, mandating vaccines and all this other stuff. How did he get COVID? But the people up there have had enough. So now you have what's called the Freedom Convoy, which has set a world record. It's about 47.5 miles long of truckers. And a GoFundMe account has been set up by the organizers of this, the Freedom Convoy, that they've raised about $5.5 million. They said that they could keep all of the trucks in place for like 4 to 6 years. And you have Justin Trudeau calling them terrorists and telling them that they are incorrect thinking, that they have and they're dangerous. And you have people on the other side, on the left, trying to say, oh well, there's a chance for radicalization. There's a chance for violence. Well, they've been completely peaceful. if you look at the pictures, if they are on a 4-lane highway, they're only taking up 3 lanes. They leave 1 lane open so anybody who wants to pass by can pass by. If they're on a road where exit ramps over here, they stay completely out of the lane for the exit ramps so people can go about their business if they need to go about their business. It's a complete peaceful thing, but yet the left is going to step in and say that they're dangerous and that it's a threat to democracy, and that no, that's exactly what democracy is. They're protesting for their rights. You have truckers that are being told that they're going to lose their jobs if they don't comply with the mandate in Canada. Well, this goes exactly along the conversation I had with David Gann about BNSF. You have companies that are being pressured by the governments to make their employees comply under the threat of losing their jobs. And that's wrong. You should want to bring into the fold. You should want to you should want your people to embrace your policy. Yes, there's always going to be people that aren't going to agree with it. But nobody is going to strictly just flat out comply if you tell them, hey, if you don't do this, we're taking away your livelihood. I mean, they just went too fucking far. They've overplayed their hand. And now it's starting to backlash. And I'm happy to see that. I'm glad to see that. I think it's enough. And I think people have had enough, and they're finally standing up. I have said since last January 6th, I was invited to go there, and I refused to go. I knew what was going to occur in Washington, D.C. I refused. I was not going to be any part of that because I knew what was going to happen. The whole thing was a setup. There's agent provocateurs that were involved in all of that. And now you have the director of FBI in front of Congress saying she can't answer any of the questions. She can't answer whether or not there were FBI agents involved in that event. She can't say whether or not FBI agents were incited any of it. She can't say that if any FBI agents went inside of the Capitol. She refused to answer any of those questions. I knew that kind of stuff was going to happen because, look, you can't get anywhere near Washington, D.C. without being photographed 100 different times. And that's how they were able to track down people. If you went inside and they had a picture of you, they were able to track you down within days. Now, I don't agree with any type of protest being violent. I don't care what side it's on. I don't, a little violence or a lot of violence. I don't agree with any of it being there. That's not what a protest is for. A protest is meant to peacefully express your opinion and ride that out. And you take that risk whether or not anything changes from it whatsoever, but that's what a protest is supposed to be about. The moment you put violence into it, you're no longer a protest. You become something else. I don't agree with people going into the Capitol and destroying things. I don't agree with people going into cities and burning down businesses. I don't agree with any of that. There is a difference between the overall events of January 6th and the BLM protests and riots from the summer of 20. But we have to be better than all of these events. We have to stop allowing the government that ability and the ability to dictate to us how we have to go about our daily lives. Again, giving the government that kind of power is what empowers social media platforms like YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to start censoring people. Because you have a narrative that's being put out there by the government that is going to be supported by the social media organizations because that they work hand in hand with the government. That's why the government doesn't come in and crack down on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, is because the social media platforms willingly comply with them. Again, I understand I'm putting this out here on YouTube, but that's my choice. I'm choosing to put it out there, so I must choose to operate within the confines of the rules that YouTube puts out for me. That's the covenant. That's the agreement. Unfortunately, with the federal government, they keep changing the rules. They keep moving the goalpost. They don't like the answers and the results that they're getting, so they move the goalpost a little bit further and they make it even harder for us to achieve. And these things are wrong. So I think that we as a country, that we start coming together with reasonable behavior, with reasonable thought, that we can end all of this, that we can put an end to all this nonsense. Again, the virus is not going away. COVID is real, and it's here to stay. If you need to get vaccinated, get vaccinated. I'm not going to get vaccinated. If you're sick, stay the fuck home. I will tell you that that I had interaction with somebody that I found out afterwards they had tested positive, and I went and I took a home test. I tested negative. I wasn't upset. I understand the risks of being out and around people, that this is what may occur. That's my choice. Didn't bitch and complain about it. We just realized that this is a fact of life that we have to live under today. So if we can do that as a society, and that we can accept that this is just how that the virus isn't going away. But that's where the open conversation comes in. Because there's not one single answer as to the best way to live our lives and go about moving forward on all this. Certainly being told that this is the only answer and you have to live this way, and if you don't do this, that you're going to lose your job, that's not the right way to get people on your side. Having the open conversation like Joe Rogan, like the way I'm having these conversations here, the conversations I've had with numerous guests on my show, that's the way things are going to change. It opens people's eyes and it enlightens them to different topics and conversation. And it may just spark something that causes them to think about something completely disconnected in a totally different way. I think we can do better. I think that we as Americans can do better. And I'm proud of my Canadian brothers and sisters to the north. I was very, very disappointed in them for quite a long time for just simply going along with everything. But I'm very proud of what they're doing. It's going to put some pressure on that government to think about the decisions they're making. And I'm happy for them. I'm happy that they'll probably start seeing some changes up there, and maybe Justin Trudeau, dictator to the north, will wake his dumb ass up and hopefully lighten up on the Canadian people just a little bit. So, guys, I'm going to end it there. I want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to David Gann for coming on my show over the weekend. It was a fantastic show. Cannot wait to have him on again. Topics of conversation were fantastic. We talked a lot about crypto, which was very, very enlightening to me because he is actually very involved in it. So I do recommend you guys check out that episode if you haven't already. It's a bit long. It's about 2.5 hours long. You will also notice that there's none of the other production effects on that particular show. Something got corrupted on the original file. I was able to upload it to YouTube, but for whatever reason, my production software was having an issue with it and it just wasn't working properly. So I got the original raw video up there. Like I said, it's a bit long. It's about 2.5 hours, but I think you guys will enjoy every part of it. David's a very smart individual. Lots of different things that we talk about. So I think you guys will really enjoy that. But thank you guys. Thank everybody that has just been amazing. Had somebody, I had a really bad headache yesterday. I had somebody reach out to me yesterday and check on me, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you to everybody out there, and I will talk to y'all very, very soon.